The daycare owner told us we were paranoid parents after we reported concerning bruises on our daughter. When we threatened to involve authorities, she said, "Lawyers cost money you probably don't have." We withdrew her immediately. That was 10 months ago. This morning, the state revoked their childcare license. I was pouring my second coffee when I saw the headline. My phone was face up on the kitchen counter, and the news alert lit up the screen like a flare. Sunshine Corner daycare license revoked after investigation reveals pattern of child abuse. My hands started shaking so badly I had to set the mug down. Coffee sloshed over the rim and pooled on the granite. I didn't move to clean it up. I just stood there, staring at those words, feeling 10 months of rage and vindication crash through my chest all at once. Megan was already at work. Our daughter Lily was at her new daycare, the good one, the safe one. And I was alone in our kitchen, watching the institution that had gaslit us, threatened us, and dismissed our concerns finally get what it deserved. 10 months ago, I would have given anything to see that headline. 10 months ago, I was a different person. Angrier, more desperate, less sure of myself as a father. My wife and I had enrolled Lily at Sunshine Corner when she was 18 months old. We'd done everything right. We toured the facility twice. We checked their state inspection records online. We read reviews. We met the owner, Diane Portman, who gave us the whole song and dance about her 20 years of experience, her degree in early childhood education, her philosophy of nurturing each child's unique potential. She had this warm, grandmotherly vibe that made you want to trust her immediately. The building was bright and clean, with murals of animals on the walls and age-appropriate toys organized in colorful bins. It looked perfect. It felt perfect. We congratulated ourselves on finding such a great place. For the first 6 months, everything seemed fine. Lily was happy. She'd run to her teachers when we dropped her off in the mornings. She came home tired but content, with finger paintings and stories about circle time. We paid $1,400 a month for full-time care, which was actually on the lower end for our area. Money was tight. I was working as a software engineer at a mid-sized company, pulling in decent money, but Megan's job as a physical therapist had unpredictable hours. We needed reliable childcare, and Sunshine Corner seemed to be exactly that. Then came the first bruise. It was a Thursday evening in late April when I noticed it. I was giving Lily her bath, and when I turned her arm to wash under it, I saw a dark purple mark on the inside of her bicep. It was roughly circular, about the size of a quarter, with distinct edges. I called Megan into the bathroom. We both stared at it, trying to remember if Lily had fallen recently, if we'd seen her bump into anything. She was almost 2.5 by then, running everywhere, climbing on furniture despite our constant warnings. Kids got bruises. That's what we told ourselves. But something about this one felt different. The placement was odd, too high on the arm to be from a typical fall, and the shape was too defined, too deliberate. The next morning at drop-off, I mentioned it to her teacher, a young woman named Ashley who'd been there for about 8 months. She looked at the bruise and immediately said Lily must have bumped it on one of the low tables during free play. She said it so quickly, so smoothly, that I almost believed her. Almost. But I noticed she didn't write it down in the daily report, which they were supposed to do for any injuries that happened at the facility. I mentioned that, and Ashley said she would add it later. She never did. When I picked Lily up that afternoon, I checked the daily sheet. Nothing. No mention of a bumped arm, no incident report. I told myself maybe Ashley had just forgotten. Maybe I was being paranoid like Diane would later accuse us of being. 2 weeks passed. The bruise faded to a yellowish green and then disappeared. I almost forgot about it. Then Lily came home with another one. This time it was on her thigh, a handprint-sized mark that made my stomach turn over. It was a Monday evening, and Megan found it when she was changing Lily into her pajamas. We stood in our daughter's nursery, the nightlight casting soft shadows on the walls, and looked at each other with the same unspoken thought. This wasn't from playing. This was from someone grabbing her. Hard. I took photos immediately, using my phone to capture the bruise from multiple angles with a timestamp visible. Then I measured it with a ruler and took more photos showing the scale. I'd watched enough true crime documentaries to know documentation mattered. Megan held Lily and asked her what happened, keeping her voice gentle and calm. Lily was still learning to talk in full sentences, her vocabulary limited to simple phrases and individual words. She said, "Miss Diane, time out." Then she pointed to the bruise and said, "Hurt." My heart stopped. Megan's face went white. Miss Diane was the owner, the woman with 20 years of experience and the warm smile, the woman we'd trusted with our daughter. That night, we didn't sleep. We lay in bed, going over every interaction we'd had at Sunshine Corner, looking for signs we'd missed. Megan pulled up the facility's inspection records again on her laptop, scrolling through years of reports. They were clean. No violations, no complaints, nothing that would have warned us. But our daughter had bruises shaped like fingers, and she'd named Diane. In the morning, we were going to that daycare, and we were going to get answers. I rehearsed what I'd say, trying to keep my voice level, trying to stay calm for Lily's sake. But inside, I was already furious. We arrived at Sunshine Corner at 8:30 in the morning, earlier than our usual drop-off time. I'd taken the morning off work, telling my manager I had a family emergency. Diane was in her office, a small room near the entrance decorated with children's artwork and photos of smiling kids. She looked up when we knocked, that familiar warm smile spreading across her face. She asked if everything was okay, her voice dripping with false concern that I only recognized in hindsight. Megan did most of the talking. She showed Diane the photos of Lily's bruise, explained what Lily had said, and asked directly if Diane had put our daughter in timeout and grabbed her hard enough to leave marks. The transformation was immediate and chilling. Diane's smile vanished. Her eyes went cold. She stood up from her desk and closed the office door, then turned to face us with her arms crossed. She said we were making very serious accusations, the kind that could destroy someone's livelihood. She said Lily was in a defiant phase, that timeout was a normal part of discipline, and that toddlers bruised easily from normal activities. When I pointed out that the bruise was clearly from someone's grip, she laughed. Actually laughed. She said we were clearly paranoid first-time parents who didn't understand how rough children could be with each other. She suggested maybe we should reconsider whether we were ready for daycare at all. I felt Megan's hand grip my arm, holding me back because she could feel my anger rising. I asked Diane point blank if she'd grabbed our daughter. She said she'd used appropriate physical guidance during a timeout when Lily was having a tantrum and trying to run away. She made it sound so reasonable, so normal. Just a teacher maintaining control of an unruly toddler. But I'd seen the photos. I'd measured that bruise. That wasn't guidance. That was force. I told her we wanted to file a formal complaint and that we expected her to document this conversation. That's when Diane's mask slipped completely. She leaned back against her desk and looked at us with something close to contempt. She said we were welcome to file whatever we wanted, but we should know that lawyers cost money we probably didn't have. She said it slowly, deliberately, letting each word land. She knew we weren't wealthy. She knew we were stretching to afford even her discounted rate. She was threatening us, making it clear that if we pushed this, she'd drag us into an expensive legal battle. Then she opened her office door and suggested we take the rest of the day to think about whether we really wanted to pursue this path. The unspoken message was clear. Back off, or this gets ugly. We left with Lily still in Megan's arms. We didn't even go to the classroom to get her things. We just walked out to the parking lot in stunned silence. I was shaking with rage, my vision literally blurred at the edges. Megan was crying quietly, holding Lily close. We sat in the car for 10 minutes, not starting the engine, just trying to process what had happened. Our daughter had been hurt by someone we'd trusted. We'd confronted that person with evidence, and we'd been threatened and dismissed. I wanted to drive straight to the police station. Megan wanted to call a lawyer. We ended up doing neither right away because we didn't know where to start, and we were terrified of making things worse. That afternoon, while Lily napped, I started researching. I looked up child abuse reporting requirements in our state. I found out that daycare providers were mandatory reporters, meaning they were legally required to report suspected abuse. The irony wasn't lost on me. I also learned that we could file a report directly with the state's Department of Children and Family Services without needing a lawyer first. I found the online form and started filling it out, documenting everything. The dates of the bruises, the photos, Lily's statement, Diane's admission that she'd used physical guidance, and her threat about legal costs. Megan added details I'd missed, times and dates and specific quotes. We submitted it at 4:18 p.m. on that Wednesday. The confirmation email said we should expect contact within 5 to 7 business days. We found a new daycare within 48 hours. It was more expensive, $1,800 a month, which meant cutting into our already tight savings. But the director, a woman named Carol Hutchinson, walked us through their entire safety and discipline policy, showed us their camera system that parents could access anytime via an app, and gave us references from 3 current families. She took the time to get down on Lily's level and talk to her gently, never once mentioning timeouts or physical guidance. When we explained why we were switching daycares mid-year, Carol's expression turned serious. She said she'd heard whispers about Sunshine Corner from other providers in the area, nothing concrete, just a sense that something was off. She promised that Lily would be safe there, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. The investigator from DCFS called me on a Monday morning, 9 days after we'd filed the report. Her name was Linda Kowalski, and she identified herself as a licensed social worker with 11 years of experience in child protective services. She had a calm, professional voice that immediately put me at ease. She said she'd reviewed our complaint and the accompanying photos, and she wanted to schedule a home visit to interview us and observe Lily. We set it for that Thursday evening after I got off work. Linda asked if we had any other documentation, medical records, witness statements, anything that could support our case. I told her about the daily report sheets that mysteriously never mentioned Lily's injuries. She made a note of that. Thursday came, and Linda arrived exactly on time, carrying a worn leather portfolio and wearing business casual clothes that looked comfortable but professional. She introduced herself to Lily first, getting down to her level and complimenting her stuffed elephant. Then she sat with us at our dining room table and took us through the entire timeline again. She asked detailed questions. What time did we notice the first bruise? What exactly did Lily say when we asked her about it? How did Diane react when we confronted her? Had we noticed any behavioral changes in Lily? I showed her the photos on my phone, and she asked me to email them to her official address immediately, which I did while sitting there. She examined the images on her own tablet, zooming in, taking notes. Then Linda asked to see Lily's current daycare setup and any records we had from Sunshine Corner. I gave her the stack of daily reports we'd saved, and she went through them methodically, noting the gaps, the missing incident reports. She asked if we'd ever been inside during the day unannounced. We hadn't. Diane had a strict policy about parents calling ahead before visiting. Another red flag we'd missed. Linda wrote that down too. She spent about 90 minutes with us total, and before she left, she explained the next steps. She would be visiting Sunshine Corner unannounced to conduct an inspection and interview staff. She would be reviewing their licensing records and any previous complaints. And she would be checking if there were other families with similar concerns. She cautioned us that the process could take weeks or even months, and that the standard of evidence was high. But she believed us. That alone felt like a victory. 3 weeks passed with no updates. I called Linda twice, leaving voicemails that she returned within a day each time. She said the investigation was ongoing, that she couldn't share details, but that she was actively working the case. Meanwhile, Lily was thriving at her new daycare. She came home happy, with art projects and stories about her friends. No new bruises appeared. We started to relax slightly, though I still checked her arms and legs every single night during bath time, documenting everything with photos just in case. Megan started sleeping better. I didn't. I kept thinking about Diane's threat, about the smug way she'd dismissed us, about how many other kids might be going through the same thing. Then I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line said, "Sunshine Corner, please read." I almost deleted it as spam, but something made me open it. It was from a woman named Rachel Kim, whose son had attended Sunshine Corner 2 years earlier. She said she'd heard through the parental grapevine that we'd filed a complaint against Diane, and she wanted to reach out. Her son had come home with similar bruises. She'd confronted Diane and gotten the same dismissive response, the same veiled threats about legal costs. She'd pulled her son out but never filed a formal complaint because she didn't think anyone would believe her. She said she still had photos and would be willing to share them if it would help our case. I called Linda immediately. She asked me to forward the email and to give Rachel her contact information. I did both. Rachel and I spoke on the phone that evening for over an hour. She described incidents almost identical to ours, bruises shaped like fingerprints, a toddler saying, "Miss Diane, time out," the gaslighting and threats during confrontation. She said her son had nightmares for months after leaving Sunshine Corner. She'd taken him to a child psychologist, Dr. Anthony Reeves, who documented signs of trauma consistent with aggressive physical discipline. She still had his report. She offered to send it all to Linda. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 more families contacted me. All of them had similar stories. All of them had pulled their kids from Sunshine Corner after concerning incidents. None of them had filed formal complaints because Diane had successfully intimidated them or made them doubt their own perceptions. I compiled everything into a shared folder. Photos of bruises from 5 different children spanning 3 years, medical reports, email exchanges with Diane, witness statements from parents. I sent the link to Linda with a message that said simply, "This is bigger than we thought." Linda called me the next day. She said she'd been building a case quietly, interviewing former staff members who'd left Sunshine Corner under contentious circumstances. 2 of them had come forward with first-hand accounts of Diane's treatment of children. One former teacher, Melissa Grant, said she'd been fired after she objected to Diane's timeout methods, which included physically restraining toddlers in a supply closet for extended periods. Melissa had documentation, text messages to her husband from when she still worked there, describing what she'd witnessed and her growing concerns. She'd been too afraid to report it at the time because Diane had threatened to blacklist her in the local childcare community. But now, with multiple families coming forward, she was ready to go on record. The investigation shifted into high gear. Linda brought in a colleague, James Rivera, who specialized in institutional abuse cases. James had 16 years of experience with DCFS and had been instrumental in shutting down 3 other problematic facilities in the county. He was blunt and no-nonsense when I met him. He told me straight out that these cases were hard to prosecute because they often came down to he said, she said. But with the volume of evidence we'd compiled, with the pattern spanning years, with multiple witnesses, both families and former staff, they had a real shot at building an airtight case. He said Diane had gotten away with it for so long because she was skilled at targeting families who wouldn't push back, young parents, single mothers, people with limited resources. She'd underestimated us. The inspection happened on a Thursday morning in late June. Linda and James arrived at Sunshine Corner with 2 state licensing officers and a child welfare attorney named Patricia Newell. They spent 6 hours on site, interviewing current staff, reviewing records, inspecting the physical facility. They found the supply closet Melissa had described, complete with a lock on the outside of the door that violated multiple safety codes. They found gaps in incident reports spanning years, patterns of undocumented injuries, and inconsistencies in staff-to-child ratios. They interviewed parents picking up their kids that afternoon, and several broke down describing concerns they'd been afraid to voice. By the end of the day, Sunshine Corner received multiple violations and a provisional license status, meaning they had 30 days to correct the issues or face closure. Diane hired a lawyer, predictably. His name was Robert Kensington, a local attorney who specialized in defending businesses against regulatory actions. He was expensive, charging $400 an hour according to the rate sheet that got leaked later. He immediately went on the offensive, claiming the investigation was biased, that disgruntled former employees and paranoid parents had conspired to destroy an innocent woman's livelihood. He filed motions challenging the validity of the inspection, questioning the credentials of the investigators, and demanding that all evidence be thrown out. He gave an interview to the local newspaper painting Diane as a victim of a witch hunt, a dedicated educator being crucified by helicopter parents who couldn't accept that their children were simply energetic and accident-prone. The article made my blood boil. The newspaper ran it with a sympathetic photo of Diane looking tired and sad, surrounded by children's artwork. The headline read, "Local daycare owner fights back against allegations." They buried our side of the story in the final paragraphs, giving equal weight to Diane's denials and our documented evidence as if truth was a matter of opinion. The comments section filled with people defending Diane, saying kids bruise easily, accusing us of being overly protective. Only a few people pushed back, pointing out that 5 families with nearly identical stories over 3 years wasn't coincidence. I wanted to respond to every comment, to shout the truth from the rooftops, but Linda advised against it. She said to let the investigation speak for itself. The 30-day deadline came and went. Sunshine Corner made cosmetic changes, removing the lock from the supply closet, updating some paperwork, but failed to address the core issues. The state licensing board met to review the case. Patricia Newell presented the compiled evidence, photos of bruises from multiple children, testimony from former staff, documentation of policy violations, medical reports from child psychologists. Diane's lawyer argued that there was no proof of intentional harm, that all the incidents were explainable as normal accidents, that the state was exceeding its authority. The board deliberated for 3 hours. I wasn't allowed to attend that meeting, but Linda called me immediately after. She sounded exhausted, but satisfied. The board had voted to extend Sunshine Corner's provisional status and to launch a formal abuse investigation in coordination with the local police department. This was bigger than a licensing issue now. This was potential criminal charges. Linda said Detective Michael Ortega from the Crimes Against Children unit would be taking over the criminal side of the investigation. She gave me his contact information and said he'd likely want to interview us within the week. Detective Ortega called me that Friday evening. He had a deep, authoritative voice that somehow managed to be both intimidating and reassuring. He introduced himself with his full credentials: 15 years with the department, 8 years specifically in crimes against children, certified in forensic interviewing of minors. He said he'd reviewed all the evidence compiled by DCFS and considered it credible. He wanted to conduct formal interviews with all the families involved, preferably with our children present, so he could have trained specialists talk to them using age-appropriate techniques. He explained that child testimony was delicate, that the interviews had to be done correctly to be admissible in court, and that he wanted to make sure everything was handled by the book. We scheduled Lily's interview for the following Wednesday at a child advocacy center across town. The Child Advocacy Center was a single-story building designed to look friendly and non-threatening, with bright colors and toys in the waiting room. We met Detective Ortega there, along with a forensic interviewer named Dr. Amanda Stiles, a clinical psychologist with specialized training in talking to young trauma victims. She explained that she would talk to Lily alone in a room equipped with cameras and microphones, that we could watch from an observation room, and that the entire session would be recorded for potential use in court. She said to expect the interview to last about 45 minutes and that Lily might not want to talk about what happened, which was normal and okay. We signed the consent forms, and Megan kissed Lily's forehead before Dr. Stiles led her into the interview room. Watching through the one-way glass was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Dr. Stiles was incredible, patient, and gentle, using dolls and drawings to help Lily communicate. Lily talked about Miss Diane and timeout chair and the dark room. She showed on a doll where she'd been grabbed. She drew a picture of a stick figure with a sad face sitting in a small space. My daughter, not even 3 years old, had processed trauma clearly enough to articulate it with professional help. Megan was crying silently beside me. Detective Ortega stood behind us taking notes, his face carved from stone. When it was over, Dr. Stiles brought Lily back to us, and we held her for a long time. The detective said the interview had been powerful, clear, and would be very useful in the case. Over the next month, Detective Ortega interviewed 4 other children from the different families who'd contacted me. Each interview followed the same protocol, each one revealing similar stories of fear, physical restraint, and intimidation. He also interviewed Melissa Grant formally, recording her statement about what she'd witnessed during her time at Sunshine Corner. He obtained the facility's financial records and found that Diane had been pocketing money meant for staff training and safety equipment, using it for personal expenses. He interviewed current staff members, several of whom admitted under questioning that they'd seen Diane use excessive force but were afraid to report it. The case was building into something significant. Then came the warrant. Detective Ortega obtained a search warrant for Sunshine Corner's premises, specifically for Diane's office and the supply closet. The search happened on a Monday morning, with parents arriving for drop-off to find police cruisers in the parking lot and officers carrying boxes of evidence out of the building. Diane stood in the doorway screaming about harassment, about her rights being violated, about how the police were destroying her business. Her lawyer showed up within 20 minutes, demanding to know who'd authorized the warrant, threatening to sue the department. Detective Ortega calmly handed him a copy of the warrant signed by Judge William Foster and told him to step aside. What they found in that office made everything else look minor. Diane had kept a notebook, a detailed log of children who needed correction going back 5 years. She'd documented which kids were defiant, which ones tested boundaries, and which discipline methods she'd used on each. There were entries describing restraint techniques, timeout durations that exceeded state guidelines by hours, and notes about which parents were likely to be problems versus which ones could be managed. My family's name was in that book with a note dated the day after we'd first confronted her. Paranoid, potential legal risk, monitoring. Rachel's family was there too, so were 10 others we hadn't even identified yet. The notebook was the smoking gun. Diane's lawyer tried to claim it was a standard behavior management log, but the language was too specific, too damning. Phrases like, had to physically enforce compliance, and isolated until crying stopped weren't the vocabulary of appropriate discipline. They were confessions. Detective Ortega arrested Diane the next day on multiple counts of child abuse and endangerment. The bail was set at $50,000. She posted it within hours, her family rallying around her, still insisting she was innocent. But the damage was done. The story broke in the media, this time with the full weight of the evidence behind it. The newspaper that had previously published the sympathetic profile now ran a front-page story about the arrest, the notebook, the years of complaints that had been ignored or dismissed. The community reaction was swift and divided. Some people, especially those who'd had positive experiences at Sunshine Corner years ago, still defended Diane. They said she was being railroaded, that the evidence was taken out of context, that parents were too soft nowadays and didn't understand the need for firm discipline. But more people were horrified. Parent groups started sharing their own stories on social media, creating threads of incidents they'd dismissed at the time but now recognized as red flags. Former students, now teenagers or young adults, came forward with memories of being scared of Miss Diane, of the dark timeout room, of feeling unsafe. The accumulation of voices was overwhelming. The state licensing board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to revoke Sunshine Corner's license pending the outcome of the criminal trial. This meant immediate closure. Diane had 72 hours to notify current families and cease all operations. She fought it, of course, filing an appeal and claiming the revocation was premature. But the judge overseeing the case sided with the state, ruling that the volume and severity of the allegations created an imminent risk to children. Sunshine Corner closed its doors on a Friday afternoon in late September. Parents scrambled to find alternative care. Some blamed us for the disruption to their lives, which was painful but expected. Most understood that their children's safety was worth the inconvenience. The criminal case moved slowly through the system. Diane's lawyer filed motion after motion, trying to get evidence suppressed, trying to discredit witnesses, trying to negotiate a plea deal. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Karen Telford, refused to budge. She had 22 years of experience and a reputation for being tough on child abuse cases. She told us in a pre-trial meeting that she wanted to take this to trial, to put everything on the public record, to send a message that people who hurt children would face real consequences. She said Diane's best offer would be a plea to reduce charges with guaranteed prison time, but she wasn't even sure she'd accept that. She wanted a conviction on the most serious counts. The trial was scheduled for March, almost a full year after we'd first noticed those bruises on Lily's arm. In the months leading up to it, I struggled with my role. I was going to have to testify. So was Megan. So were the other parents. Our children's interviews would be shown to a jury. Our private nightmare would become public record. But I also felt a strange sense of purpose. This wasn't just about Lily anymore. It was about every child who'd been hurt by Diane, every family she'd gaslit and threatened, every teacher she'd intimidated into silence. It was about making sure she never had the opportunity to hurt another child again. The trial lasted 8 days. The prosecution called 17 witnesses, including 5 parents, 3 former teachers, 2 child psychologists, Detective Ortega, and Linda Kowalski from DCFS. I testified on day 3. The prosecutor walked me through the entire timeline, showing the jury photos of Lily's bruises, playing the recording of our confrontation with Diane, where she'd threatened us about legal costs, presenting the documentation we'd compiled. Diane's lawyer tried to make me seem like an overprotective father who'd blown normal childhood accidents out of proportion. He asked if I'd ever spanked my daughter, if I'd ever raised my voice at her, trying to imply that any parent could leave a mark. I stayed calm and answered honestly, no, I'd never spanked her, and no, I'd never grabbed her hard enough to bruise. The most powerful testimony came from Dr. Stiles, the forensic interviewer. She explained to the jury how consistent the children's accounts were, how the details matched across multiple victims who'd never met each other, how the patterns indicated systematic rather than isolated incidents. She showed excerpts from the recorded interviews, moments where toddlers described being scared, being hurt, being locked in the dark room. The jury watched in visible discomfort. 2 of the jurors, both women who appeared to be in their 50s or 60s, were crying by the time the videos ended. Diane testified in her own defense, which her lawyer probably regretted. She was defensive, condescending, and unable to hide her contempt for the families who'd accused her. She insisted that everything she'd done was appropriate discipline, that modern parents were too permissive, that children needed firm boundaries. When the prosecutor asked her about the notebook, about the entries describing physical restraint, she claimed she'd been documenting concerning behaviors to share with parents. But she couldn't explain why she'd never actually shared those notes with anyone. She couldn't explain the lock on the supply closet door. She couldn't explain why multiple children across multiple years all described the same dark room, the same timeout chair, the same feelings of fear. She came across as exactly what she was, someone who believed she was above accountability. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. I wasn't in the courtroom when the verdict was read because witnesses weren't allowed, but Megan was. She texted me immediately. Guilty. All counts. I was at work, sitting in a conference room pretending to focus on a product launch meeting. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and cried. Not sad tears, relief, vindication, justice. When I composed myself and returned to the meeting, my manager asked if everything was okay. I said it was, better than it had been in a long time, and for the first time in months, that was completely true. The sentencing hearing was 6 weeks later. The judge, the same William Foster who'd signed the search warrant, had a reputation for being tough on child abusers. He'd spent 25 years on the bench and had heard thousands of cases. Before announcing the sentence, he gave a statement that I later read in the court transcript. He said that people who held positions of trust with children, teachers, coaches, daycare providers bore a special responsibility. When they violated that trust, when they used their authority to harm rather than protect, they deserved the harshest penalties the law allowed. He sentenced Diane to 12 years in prison, the maximum sentence for the charges she'd been convicted of. She would serve at least 80% before being eligible for parole. She would have to register as a child abuser. She would never be allowed to work with children again. Diane's family members gasped and cried when the sentence was announced. Her lawyer immediately filed an appeal, claiming the sentence was excessive, but I wasn't worried. The evidence was too strong, the conviction too solid. She was going to prison, and she was going to stay there for a long time. As we left the courthouse that day, I felt lighter than I had in over a year. Megan squeezed my hand and said, "We did it." We had. We'd stood up when it would have been easier to walk away. We'd fought when we were threatened. We'd refused to be silenced. The impact rippled beyond just Diane's case. The state conducted a comprehensive review of all licensed daycare facilities in the county, implementing new oversight requirements and random inspections. They established an anonymous reporting hotline for parents and staff to report concerns without fear of retaliation. They mandated that all facilities install camera systems in classrooms and common areas with parent access. Linda Kowalski was promoted to a supervisory position overseeing the new protocols. Detective Ortega received a commendation for his work on the case. And the families who'd come forward, all of us, became part of an informal support network, helping each other navigate the ongoing trauma and healing. Lily is 4 now, thriving at her daycare with Carol, making friends, learning to read, showing no lasting signs of what she went through. We still watch her carefully, still check for bruises, still ask her every day if she feels safe and happy. She talks about the trial sometimes in the way that young children do, mixing fantasy and reality, not fully understanding what happened but knowing that the bad lady went away and that she's safe now. Her therapist, Dr. Julia Brennan, a child psychologist specializing in early childhood trauma, says that's healthy, that Lily is processing the experience appropriately for her age. Megan and I are different now too. More cautious, more willing to trust our instincts, less afraid of being labeled paranoid. We've become advocates in a small way, speaking at a few local parent groups about warning signs, about the importance of documenting concerns, about not being intimidated into silence. It's not something we sought out, but it feels important. If our story can prevent even one other family from going through what we did, it's worth the discomfort of reliving it. This morning, when I saw that headline about Sunshine Corner's license being revoked, it felt like the final chapter closing. It had been 10 months since we'd withdrawn Lily. 10 months since Diane had threatened us and dismissed our concerns. 10 months of investigation and legal proceedings and slow, grinding justice. The headline should have come sooner, should have been there before any children were hurt, but it was there now. The system had finally worked, not because it was designed to, but because people within it, Linda, James, Detective Ortega, Karen Telford, chose to make it work. And because families like us, scared and uncertain, chose to fight. I forwarded the article to Rachel, to Melissa, to the other parents who'd been part of building the case. Within minutes, my phone started buzzing with responses. Relief, satisfaction, some residual anger that it took so long. We'd all been changed by this experience, forced to become advocates and investigators and witnesses when all we'd wanted was safe care for our children. But we'd won. Diane was in prison. Sunshine Corner was permanently closed, and other children were safer because we'd refused to stay silent. Tonight, I'll go home and have dinner with my family. I'll give Lily a bath and check for bruises, a habit I'll probably never break entirely. I'll read her a story and tuck her into bed and tell her she's safe and loved. And I'll sleep soundly for the first time in months, knowing that the woman who hurt my daughter and threatened my family can't hurt anyone else's child. That's not revenge. That's justice. and it feels like something I can finally breathe around. The newspaper article is still open on my phone. I read it one more time, savoring the words. Pattern of abuse. Multiple victims. License permanently revoked. Investigation revealed systematic failures. Every phrase is a vindication, every sentence a confirmation that we weren't paranoid, weren't overreacting, weren't making things up. We were right. And now everyone knows it. If you made it this far, thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.